The Smurg by Jessiy, read by Ella Max Mabella. Chapter 2. Africa was amazing. It was large and open with so many different landscapes to see. The jungles and the savannah were her favorites. The people were colorful and kind, with cultures that were so different from everything she was used to. Magic was used in ways she never considered before. She could really see what the appeal of a world travel would be to a young powerful wizard. In a different world, perhaps, it would have been something she would have done herself. When they finally approached the village on foot after nearly a month of travel, Draco and Hermione were immensely excited, albeit exhausted. They walked in the midst of their village and were immediately surrounded by warrior wizards. It was one of the possible scenarios they anticipated while on their journey. After she recounted Voldemort's experience, they had leaned towards the village, casting first and asking questions later. Both were happily surprised they weren't killed on sight, something that was also on their possibility of outcome lists. Hermione and Draco had agreed that their best chance of seeing the Smurg was by not occluding or acting suspicious or secretive in any way. With that in mind, they walked into the village, minds open and their wands safely tucked in their pack. Some would call that vulnerable or foolish, but Hermione needed to see the Smurg. If she couldn't, was there really any point in living? Immediately they were brought to a crude hut that could only boast the barest of walls and a thatched roof. It was not her idea of comfort, but she guessed that was the point. At least they anticipated on letting the two of them leave alive. If staying in a bare hut for a while was the price to pay, to be there and try to convince the villagers that they were worthy enough to speak with the Smurg, then who was she to disparage their accommodations? Hermione sat on the edge of a straw pallet and pulled her small beaded bag onto her lap. Draco sat heavily next to her, watching as she drew out long, thin boxes that they had brought as a gift to bribe their way into the Smurg's presence. "When do you think would be a good time to give them the gift?" Hermione mused out loud. She couldn't have asked a better person for gift-giving advice, as Draco had an extensive etiquette upbringing enforced by his mother, the socialite and once debutante. "Now, before they kill us. A gift, it may be, but don't forget this is a bribe." He smirked, looking so much like the old Draco Malfoy that Hermione was thrown back to their third year, to the moment where her fist landed on his smarmy face, and couldn't help but smirk in return as she remembered the way he collapsed like a cart house after being disturbed by a gust of wind. Hermione focused once more on what was in front of her, and rolled her eyes, knowing that though he learned etiquette from his mother, his bribery experience was completely his father's doing. "I guess now is as good a time as any," she muttered and stood, turning to look at Draco as he laid out on the straw cot and closed his eyes. "Aren't you coming with me?" "I think you can handle giving a gift all on your own." "They might kill me on sight just because of what it is." "You are right," he said, sitting up, and concern wrinkled his brow. "Don't forget to ward the door on your way out." He laid back down, that infuriating smirk growing the longer she fumed silently, hovering over his seemingly relaxed body. He was damn lucky that she was working on learning restraint and hexing her allies, namely him. Hermione pivoted on the balls of her feet and walked out of the hut. She had taken a mere 3 steps before she was immediately surrounded again. "We have brought a gift for the Smurg," she said, holding up the small wooden box. When no one moved, she removed the lid and showed them the innocent length of wood that sat inside on a bed of velvet. A sudden intake of breath from the elders was her only indication that they recognized the unbroken and unaligned elder wand. A ripple of unease swept through the villagers as the elders moved, as if one to box her in against the small hut. "How do you know about the Smurg?" A man of dark skin and shockingly white kinky hair muttered dangerously, never taking his eyes off of the deadly wand that she offered them. "My best friend defeated Tom Riddle, and our losses were incredibly high. It was he who won the allegiance of the wand and died of his injuries shortly after, leaving the wand without a master. After the battle, there were few wizards living, and I know, given a chance, I could make things better for everyone. I began my research into time travel. After days of scouring through books, I was desperate and ended up going through Tom Riddle's personal items. He kept a journal of his travels as a young man, and I read about his stop here. I was hoping the Smurg could help us." "She isn't a fortune-teller to fix your life. Her services are for the betterment of all." "Would you ask her if she would see us? Please." Hermione ignored his previous comment and remained dogged. "I can promise no more than that. If she does not wish to meet you, you both will leave." "All right." Hermione agreed and went back into the hut where Draco was already spread out on his straw cot snoring. She snorted. He wouldn't have lasted 5 minutes on a hunt for Horcruxes. She laid down to wait, hoping that the Smurg would agree to meet them. Hermione really didn't know what she would do if they were turned away. And before she knew it, her lids weighed heavily, and it was longer times between each time she blinked them open. She was awoken by rough hands that shook her vigorously. She gasped as she reflexively reached for her wand and only hit a solid wall of muscle. "She summoned you," a deep voice murmured. They walked as a group towards the center hut. Hermione could feel the shimmer of spells gliding over her skin as she passed through the doorway, and there the warriors stayed, standing guard just inside the wards. They silently pushed her through the doorway and shut the door behind her. Hermione was left alone in the dead of night in a dark and watered hut, in the center of the village with no way to defend herself. Fear called in her stomach as she wondered if Voldemort's journals were wrong. Perhaps the parasite needed new hosts to suck the life out of. Maybe it just told him something to make him go away. But the one thought that was niggling at the back of her mind was the date that the Smurg had given him as the date of his death was accurate. "Come closer," a high girlish voice beckoned. "I don't know the way, it's too dark," Hermione said. A small ball of light appeared in the palm of the hand of a very young child. She was only 5 or 6 years old. Her long white hair hung loosely to her shoulder blades as her milky white eyes focused on Hermione's approaching form. Hermione was horrified, and her hand covered her mouth. "Do not mourn for me. I may not be a normal child, but I have the life of 1,000 Smurgs in my head. I've never just been a child. I've always been the chosen. I'm blessed," the child said, voice devoid of emotion. "I lost my childlike innocence early, and I will always mourn the loss of the same in any other." Hermione stood in front of the girl, who was seated on a throne made of a living tree that had been twisted as it grew into the shape of a grand and imposing living throne. "I was told that you knew me from the journal of Tom Riddle's." "Yes." "He was a blight on the world, but even blights are needed to strengthen future crops and the will of the man. I know why you are here. I don't think it would do any good to change this." "If I had the chance, I could change things for better." "If you have the chance, you may lose your hard-won victory." "This was no victory." "For the world it was." "Not for my world." "No, I suppose it wasn't. But it could have been a lot worse. It almost was." "What do you mean?" "If your blonde companion had embraced his familiar role, Voldemort would have triumphed." "Good thing he didn't, then." "The world is very fortunate." "Tom's journal said that everyone leaves either with a curse or blessing. What will I leave with?" "That depends." "On what?" "If I send you back, can you put all of your prejudices aside?" Hermione was indignant. She was not the prejudiced one, but after a second of reflection she thought about it. If she went back in time, those horrible things wouldn't have happened yet. Could she set all of that aside and treat her enemies as if she was meeting them for the first time? Could she give them all a second chance? "I would try very hard," Hermione finally said. The Smurg smiled in approval. "If you would have said yes, you would have been unworthy because of your lie. If you would have said no, you would have been unworthy because of your inability to do the right thing. You are worthy of my blessing." The Smurg smiled and reached out a fist. Hermione held her hand flat, palm up, as the little girl dropped 3 seeds into Hermione's hand. "Plant them in a magical garden and watch it grow. When the seedling glows blue, you must give it a blood sacrifice. If it accepts your offering, it will bear a single piece of fruit in 3 days. This first fruit will have the magic in it that you seek. The barren tree left behind will eventually produce a Smurg of its own. Once the tree has its blood sacrifice, it will not be able to be undone. Do you accept the price of your blessing?" "The Smurg will select a host among the available women." "The Smurg will choose its host from the family that cares for the garden it resides in. A Smurg will always choose a child." "What would happen if I don't offer the tree a blood sacrifice?" "It would become an ever-bearing pomegranate tree that would sprout fruit in even the harshest winters." "But it would never become a Smurg." "Correct." "Thank you for your blessing. I hope you achieve great longevity." The little girl nodded her head with a smile and dropped a ball of light, a clear dismissal, from the hut. Hermione turned and walked out blindly, heavily laden with moral conundrums. Would going back in time be a good enough reason to condemn a line of girls into hosting a powerful parasite? Hermione couldn't help thinking that it wasn't very much like a blessing at all. Hermione gently wrapped the seed in a silk scarf that she brought along and put it in her beaded bag. The warriors stood like sentinels around the hut, only watching Hermione as she slowly made her way back to the hut that the village had given her and Draco. Once there, she crawled back onto the straw and fell asleep, hoping that her unconscious mind would give her an answer. On one hand, she could go back in time. On the other hand, she would be giving over the lives of countless girls to do it. If she went through with it, would she be any better than Voldemort? When Hermione woke up the next morning, Draco was gone. She poked her head out of the hut and was greeted with bowls and dishes of various foods, busy women and men going about their day, and children running about freely playing together as good friends do. Hermione joined the gathering with a smile and watched with interest the employment of many of the people, noticing that they bowed their head and called her Moomba as she passed. She smiled, not knowing what it meant, but taking social cues, she assumed it was something positive. She shrugged and moved, hoping she would see Draco soon. A little girl the same age as the Smurg ran up to her and tugged on Hermione's shirt.
"They're waiting for you, Moomba."
"Who is?"
"Your companion and the eldest, come."
"What does Moomba mean?" Hermione asked curiously.
"The one in the beginning, the creator."
Hermione sputtered and shrugged. "Why are they calling me the creator?"
"You'll create the new Smurg, and ours will no longer be alone. They will be connected."
"In what way?"
"The seeds of the tree and the trees are special. Once long ago, there were whole forests of trees, and they were all connected. Not anymore. Ours is the last,"
she said sadly. "Then all Smurgs are connected."
"Yes, the more they are, the stronger they are. The more they can do for the world."
"But one person has to give up her whole life for it. Why are the hosts always girls?"
"They chosen are gifted extremely long life. The only sacrifice is their innocence. They grow knowing the best and the worst of the world. Girls are the bearers of life, so are the Smurg."
"Their only sacrifice," Hermione spat. "Innocence should not be an acceptable sacrifice."
"She gains much, and only one of us is chosen. The rest of us are blessed to protect her. She lives a satisfying life."
"But is she happy?"
"What is happiness? Happiness is not the same for everyone, and it is not the same thing throughout one's life."
"How did you become so wise in your young life?"
"We are taught the lessons of the tree. The Smurg sings the song of a time where there were many. We learned from her."
They reached a small enclosure that the little girl gestured to, bidding Hermione to enter. "Aren't you coming too?" Hermione asked the little girl.
"Only the blessed may enter."
"And you are not blessed?"
"Not everyone can be worthy."
"But you protect her."
"We are still human, and we have our own fears and vices. Very few are actually worthy. We celebrate because two have come to us, the Moomba and the Mlinzi."
"What is the Mlinzi?"
"He's the protector."
"The protector of the Smurg. Will he be forced to stay?"
"He will sire daughters who will host the new Smurg. His tribe will protect her. He will protect the tree. The Smurg has already seen it."
"I don't believe in prophecy."
"Neither do we."
"What does that even mean?" Hermione asked, frustrated. The little girl walked away with an enigmatic little smile. Hermione frowned as she watched a dark-skinned child rejoin her playmates before turning around and walking into the hut. Draco was sitting in a circle with 5 other people. Their ages varied from ancient to child. Draco smirked, enjoying Hermione's confusion. He patted the ground next to him in the same manner that she had that day in his library. His eyes danced with humor. "Come on, Granger. We're just about to begin." "Begin what?" "Breakfast." "Right." The moment she sat down, 2 women joined the group, carrying bowls and flasks filled with food and drink. Their day went by fast. The whole village was welcoming and celebratory. It wasn't often that they entertained guests, and even less when those guests were blessed. It was a lovely day spent before they left in the morning. Their trip back to Malfoy Manor was much quicker and easier. Since they had already visited several waypoints, they were able to operate back to Wiltshire in 4 short bursts. Tanzania to Algeria, Algeria to Spain, Spain to France, and France to Wiltshire. H.G. Hermione and Draco were in the small sitting room of the conservatory, each laying on a couch on opposite sides of each other. "What did she tell you?" Hermione asked. "She asked me if I had to do it all over again, would I make the same decisions to flee the manor." "What did you say?" "I told her I wasn't sure. I don't think my father would have been forced to kill me. The Dark Lord was fond of forcing his followers into doing things they didn't want to do to test their loyalty. Often they had to go through with whatever he came up, but sometimes, especially in the case involving pureblood children, they did not. Although my mother would have been killed, and I couldn't have survived losing her that way. The Smurg likes indecisive people, she snorted. He agreed. She gave me a seed, but if I used them to go back in time, it would create a new Smurg. I don't think I can condemn innocent children to that fate. Did she tell you why she looks the way she does, and why she is blind? It's part of being the host for the Smurg, right? No. She was born blind, and the hair was an abnormality. She is actually the great niece of the previous Smurg. Did you know that the last Smurg wasn't born blind? They claimed she was one of the happiest people they had ever met. What are you trying to tell me? I'm trying to show you that you are as blind about the Smurg as you are about the house elves. You are pushing your thoughts and feelings onto them without considering what makes them happy. Your happiness is not the same as theirs. Hermione stared at him in shock. That was basically what a little girl in the village had told her. So you would be okay with having your daughter be the host of a new Smurg? Sure, it's a great honor. Did she give you seeds? No, she told me who my future wife would be, and that she would give me 5 children, 3 of them girls. What's her name? Ginevra Weasley. Hermione drew in a great breath and held it, desperately trying to hold back a sob. With an angry release, she narrowed her gaze. Ginny would never in a million years choose you over Harry. If you go back, things will change. She will marry me. That is what Smurg said. If I go, Ginny lives to marry you? Yes, I don't know how or why, but that is what is promised. How did you take that, being told you would marry a Weasley? Hermione snickered, relieved and mildly intrigued. They chuckled for a moment. Draco rolled onto his side, a hand under his head as a pillow. If you stay, this is what the rest of our life will look like. You're decent, Granger, but I would only marry you out of duress. We would be like siblings and would fight all the time. We would waste our lives searching for a way to go back in time without the severe consequences of the time-turners. I don't think that it is possible. So tell me, is your life so great here with me that you can't let me go? This is not about you, Malfoy. This is about your children and how they deserve a proper childhood. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. But we cannot forge the men for the crown. I see we are at an impasse, he said, flopping on his back. I don't even know if I can control the year. What if I end up in the Founders era? I think it will take you where you can do the most good. You have a lot of faith in this. Why? Do you know what the tree portion of the Smurg is called? She shook her head. It's an ent. They used to be all over the world. My father used to tell me stories about the ents when I was a kid. I don't know how accurate they are, but I used to love them. Don't ent walks? The Smurg walks, not the ent. Ents are rooted to the ground. They are trees, for goodness sake. Merlin, Granger. He huffed as if he had to explain something obvious that a 2-year-old would know. She stayed quiet, lips thinning in silent disapproval, thinking of all the Tolkienesque dreams that were now shattered. What I'm trying to say is that this doesn't seem so out of the ordinary for me. I grew up in a world of magic. It's all I've ever known, and magic is fluid and unpredictable. Not everything can be explained or reasoned out. Some things just are. Do you reason out the cause and effect of jumping into a lake? Your body oils could kill the ecosystem, but you go swimming anyway. I can either choose to jump or stand still. Exactly. What would you do? Me? I would jump. H.G. Hermione stood on a slight rise in the west gardens of Malfoy Manor. A unicorn watched from the field on the other side of the low hedge, a dazzling white among the sea of green. Hermione looked down at the silk cloth she clutched in her hand. It was time to make a decision. She was going to sacrifice the lives of generations of Malfoy girls to come and go into the past, or was she going to plant a tree that would bear fruit year-round to stay to have Draco's children? She unfolded the material and stared at the seeds. Guilt twisted in her stomach. Her decision was made days ago when she talked to Malfoy about it in the conservatory. The only problem was that she just wasn't prepared to knowingly sacrifice someone else so that she could go back in time. She would gladly lay down her own life for her friends, but for her to offer up another's life? It was a hard pill to swallow. Gritting her teeth, Hermione gently poked the seed into the hole that Draco had dug for her and covered it before sitting on the ground to wait. Malfoy brought her a tray of sandwiches and a thermos of tea after the first hour. Thanks, she murmured, digging into the first sandwich. They sat silently, chewing and watching in bemusement as the seed sprouted at an accelerated pace. The tiny seedling grew fast. It wasn't long before a sapling stood, where before it was merely a covered hole. It passed with a strong blue iridescence that shone from the very core of the tree. Hermione took a deep breath. This was it. She was going to do it. "Defendo," Hermione muttered, slicing her hand open before coupling the welling blood. Paws seemed to feel her blood, and small wispy tendrils reached out from its trunk. The delicate lines snaked around her wrist and writhed just above her exposed wound. It was as if it were waiting for her consent. Hermione rubbed the soft bark, coating it with her blood. "I'm sorry, so sorry," she muttered, not to the tree. To it she was bestowing life, but to the host that haven't been born yet. Once the blue light faded, she pulled her hand back and let the remaining drops of blood drip from her fingertips, splashing onto the grass. Malfoy grabbed her hand, healed and cleaned it, before letting it drop back to her side. "All we have to do now is wait," he said. She nodded. She had 3 days to get her shit together. The first thing that Malfoy insisted on was visiting Gringotts, but Hermione was understandably hesitant. She had stolen something from one of the vaults that they protected. She was expecting to be murdered the moment she crossed his threshold. He waved away her concerns with a ringing laugh. "Look, Ranger, I promise that they won't attack you." In the end he won, and Hermione was now standing in the back office of one of the head goblins, with Malfoy lounging arrogantly in one of the seats by the desk.
"We don't know what time she will arrive in."
"We don't know what time she will arrive in, but she needs to have access to funds. Almost all of her assets were seized as a fine for her theft, as was quite a bit of Potter's wealth. Upon the death of Harry James Potter, Hermione Jean Granger acquired the remaining Potter and Black fortunes, the remaining totaling 5 million galleons, various jewels and artifacts that are detailed."
"Almost all of her assets were seized as a fine for her theft, as was quite a bit of Potter's wealth. Upon the death of Harry James Potter, Hermione Jean Granger acquired the remaining Potter and Black fortunes, the remaining totaling 5 million galleons, various jewels and artifacts that are detailed in full on the list."
The goblin handed over a thick ream of paper. Malfoy plucked it out of her hand and began studying her assets. "What I am asking is it possible to make this available to her at any time, in any time?"
"Not these treasures in particular, but we have an ancient vault with no living relatives to claim them. We would choose a familiar vault that is worth the same as a current vault. We would only need to set the inclusion wards. Once that is done, it won't matter when she comes. Just that she does first thing. The goblins of time will give you no trouble. We have policies in place."
"And the fee?"
"A goblin-made artifact that would be signed over to me specifically."
A greedy glint entered his eye. "Only if everything is changed over first."
"All right."
"I also wish to bequeath the contents of Vault 34 to Miss Hermione Jean Granger." Surprise colored the faces of the other two. "It is my wish to see Granger well taken care of in her endeavor," Malfoy finished.
"Very well."
With little more discussion, the paperwork was signed, and Hermione was the proud owner of Vault 7, the vault of the lost house of Slytherin. They wrote the death trap that the goblins affectionately called the card to the lowest and oldest section of Gringotts. The minecart flipped and rolled and spun, going fast and slow at different intervals, making Hermione quite ill. By the time they reached Vault 7, Hermione was seriously considering kissing the ground. Her eyes went wide as she looked at the large red chimera guarding the entrance. The goblin rang a tiny high-pitched bell that made the chimera cringe away from the trio. Using his gnarled finger, the goblin turned over the wall to Hermione, her blood and magical signature now marking it as hers. The doll melted away as she stood staring at the great amassment of treasure.
"Everything has been catalogued and put on a new list that I will send to you,"
the goblin said, looking at Malfoy. Malfoy nodded before turning to look into the newly opened vault. He looked just as entranced as Hermione did, as they studied rare tomes, wands, jewels the size of eggs, mounds and mounds of galleons, and other oddities. "You are a very wealthy witch," Draco mumbled, running his fingers over the neglected leather spines of the books. Hermione scoped up some of the galleons and retreated. She had to keep reminding herself that she was able to access this at any time. Once they were back up to the main lobby, the goblin stopped them and pulled Hermione close enough so that the other goblins wouldn't be able to hear what he said.
"You adopted the name Slytherin to get that vault. Do not forget that. It is a very powerful name with many advantages and consequences. Good luck, Miss Slytherin. And don't break into any more vaults."
Hermione stood in shock. It was a perverse kind of irony. Malfoy shook his head, muttering unintelligibly under his breath. "Well, you won't have to convince anyone of your blood status," he whispered to her as they stepped out on the deserted street. Diagon Alley was a caricature of what it used to be. Weasley's wizard Weezer stood abandoned, the bright purple paint starting to peel on the north face of the building. Hermione spent the next day and a half packing, unpacking, and repacking everything she planned on taking with her. She exchanged the small beaded bag for a near yet identical one that Malfoy found among his mother's possessions. She perfected the undetectable extension charm, and with Malfoy's help, she turned the whole thing into organized chaos. By the time the small pomegranate from the tree was ready to be eaten, Hermione was over-prepared. To be continued. Thank you for listening to this chapter of The Smurg by Jessiy, read by Ella Max Mabella. If you would like to stay up to date on upcoming chapters and stories, you can follow me on YouTube, Spotify, AO3, Instagram, or Tumblr.